when my son set Clifford's pocket watch on the kitchen table and said, "I'll get this properly appraised for you. You really should know what it's worth." I didn't say anything right away. I looked at the watch. Gold-filled Elgin, 1947, white enamel face. A small scratch on the crystal, from the day Clifford dropped it loading the moving truck, the weekend we got married. He'd worn it the day Gregory was born, the day we paid off our mortgage, the day the cardiologist told him his heart wasn't what it used to be. That watch had been on his wrist, or in his vest pocket for 31 years. Now my son was sliding it across my kitchen table, like a tax form that needed filing. Gregory smiled. The same easy smile he'd had since he was 11 years old. Relaxed, convincing. The kind of smile that made teachers like him, even when he hadn't done his homework. "For insurance purposes, Mom," he added. "You'd want to know what it's worth, wouldn't you?" I said I'd think about it. He didn't push. He never pushed directly, which was something I'd started noticing more in the 14 months since Clifford passed. Gregory had gotten quieter in a certain way, less argumentative, more patient, more willing to wait. At the time, I'd told myself it was grief becoming steadiness. Now, sitting alone with the watch after he and his wife Monica had gone, I wasn't sure that's what it was at all. Monica had come with him, as she always did. She was pleasant about it, brought a store-bought pie, asked about my hip, laughed at the right moments. But she had a habit I'd begun noticing only recently. Her eyes moved around rooms when she thought no one was watching. Not the way of someone admiring a home. The way of someone taking stock. After they left, I walked through the house slowly. I don't know exactly what I was looking for. I just knew something felt off. The way a room feels when someone has been in it while you were sleeping. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it, except the cedar chest in the bedroom. Clifford's cedar chest, where I kept his things I wasn't ready to sort through. The latch wasn't fully closed. I always closed it all the way. It was a habit from decades of living with a man who couldn't stand loose ends. I knelt down and opened it. Everything appeared undisturbed. His wedding ring in the small tray on the left, the folded flag from his father's military funeral. A few papers. His watch roll, dark brown leather, the one I'd given him for Christmas the year we moved to Indianapolis. But the watch roll was in the center of the chest, not tucked to the right, where I always kept it. Someone had picked it up and put it back. Carefully, but not carefully enough. I lifted the watch roll and unrolled it. 2 slots, both empty. The Elgin was downstairs on the kitchen table where Gregory had left it. But Clifford's old Timex, the one he wore when he was doing yard work or fixing things, that had always been in the second slot. Now it was gone. I checked the rest of the chest, checked the dresser drawers. The Timex wasn't anywhere in the room. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. Then I went downstairs and picked up the Elgin. I'd held it dozens of times over the years. It was heavier than people expected, solid and cool against the palm. I turned it over, reading the engraving on the back. For Cliff, with all my heart. N. 1989. I'd picked out that inscription myself, spent 20 minutes at the jeweler insisting it wasn't too long. Something made me press my thumbnail under the back cover the way you do with antique pocket watches. Some of them have 2 case backs, an outer shell, and an inner dome beneath it. I'd never thought to try this before. I'd never had a reason to. The outer cover popped open. Inside, pressed flat against the inner case, was a piece of paper folded into a square so small it could have passed for a stray bit of packing material. My hands went still. I set the watch on the table and looked at that folded square for a moment. Then I picked it up. His handwriting. I knew it before I finished unfolding it. Clifford wrote in a particular way, capitals for things that mattered, lowercase for everything else, as if certain words deserved more space to breathe. This note was 3 lines. Box 441, Heartland Federal Savings, Fort Wayne, you'll know what to do. I read it 3 times, then I sat down. Fort Wayne. About 2 hours north on Interstate 69. Clifford had driven up there twice in the last 2 years of his life. Once for what he called a contractor licensing renewal. Once to look at a property for a potential job bid that he said fell through. I hadn't thought much about either trip at the time. After 31 years of marriage, you learn which questions your husband has already decided not to answer until he's ready. He ran out of time to be ready. I held the note flat on the table and thought about Gregory sliding that watch toward me across the kitchen. You should know what it's worth. I thought about Monica's eyes moving across the living room. I thought about the cedar chest latch and the missing Timex. Then I went upstairs and packed a bag. I didn't call anyone. Not Gregory, not my neighbor Paulette, not my sister in Dayton. I left early the next morning before the sun was all the way up, with a travel mug of coffee and the folded note in my coat pocket, and I drove north with the radio off. The drive was flat and gray, the fields on both sides still winter bare. I had a lot of time to think, which was useful and also painful. I thought about the 14 months since Clifford died, about how Gregory's visits had started as grief. Genuine grief. I believed that, I still believe it, but how over time the conversations had drifted. How much do you think the house would go for now? Did Dad have any retirement accounts beyond what you've mentioned? Mom, you don't have to worry about the business details. Gregory can handle all of that. I'd let him. That was the part that sat heaviest as I drove north. I'd been grateful. I told myself I was being practical, letting my son take on some of the burden. But I'd handed him access to things without looking closely enough at why he was asking, because he was my son, and I trusted him, and Clifford wasn't there anymore to look at me over the kitchen table and say, Norma, slow down. Heartland Federal Savings was on a corner in a quiet stretch of Fort Wayne, a brick building with tall windows and a revolving door that moved more slowly than modern ones. The kind of place that's been holding other people's secrets for a long time. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment before I went in. Inside, a young woman at the front desk listened while I explained that my husband had maintained a safe deposit box here and had recently passed. She asked for my ID and asked me to wait. A few minutes later, a man in his late 50s came out from the back hallway. Short gray hair, careful posture, a name badge that read Randall Fitch, branch manager. He shook my hand and looked at me the way people look at you when they already know something significant about why you've come. He told me my husband had left specific instructions regarding my access. He said it quietly. The way you say something in a church. He explained that Clifford had set up the box about 14 months before he died and had updated the access instructions twice after that. He'd specified that if I arrived alone, without anyone accompanying me, I was to be given full access immediately. If I came in with another person, Randall Fitch was to call a number first. The number for Harold Beach, an attorney in Indianapolis, before proceeding with anything. I had come alone. Randall Fitch brought me to the vault. The box was mid-size, heavier than it looked. He carried it to a small private room, set it on the table, and left me with it, closing the door softly. I sat down, I opened it. Inside, a thick manila envelope, a small flash drive, and a letter, unsealed, folded in thirds, my name written on the front in Clifford's handwriting. I opened the letter first. Norma. If you found the note in the watch, then you found this on your own. And that's exactly how I hoped it would happen. I'm sorry I'm not there to explain it to you in person. I kept planning to find the right moment, and then the right moment kept not being right. What I found out about Gregory, I found out slowly. I want you to understand that. Slowly, and I fought it every step of the way, because I did not want it to be true. My chest tightened. I pressed my palms flat on the letter for a moment, then kept reading. About 18 months ago, I started noticing small discrepancies in the business accounts. Not large amounts, just patterns that didn't fit our project billing. I told myself it was an accounting error and went through everything twice. Then, I hired a private accountant in Carmel, a woman named Cheryl Vogt, and what she found took 3 months to fully document. When I added Gregory to the secondary signature authorization on the Harmon Contracting LLC operating account, I told you it was a backup measure in case something happened to me. That's what I believed I was doing. What he did with that authorization was something else. I've enclosed Cheryl's full documentation. The flash drive has the bank records and correspondence from the business email archive. Total confirmed amount, $47,230. Taken over 16 months. I didn't confront him. I know that may feel wrong to you. But I needed to have everything in place first. For your protection, not for his. Harold Beach has drawn up a trust that covers the remaining assets. Gregory doesn't know exist. Everything is documented and legal. I love Gregory. I love him the way I have since the day he was born. But loving someone and protecting you from them, those are not always the same thing. Whatever you decide to do with this is yours to decide. I only ask one thing. Don't let anyone tell you what you already know. All my love, always Cliff. I sat in that room for a long time after I finished reading. I didn't cry right away. What I felt wasn't exactly like grief, even though it lived right next door to it in my chest. It was more like standing in a familiar room and watching the wallpaper peel back slowly to show what was underneath. You always knew the walls were there. You just didn't know what they were made of. Gregory, my son. The boy I'd stayed up 3 nights straight with when he had pneumonia at 18 months. The young man who'd stood at his father's retirement party and said, in front of everyone, "Dad is the best man I know." $47,000. 16 months. Small enough to stay under the noise, large enough to matter. I opened the manila envelope. The documents were exactly what Clifford described. Transaction records, dates, amounts, destination accounts. That last column tracing back, again and again, to a joint account held by Gregory and Monica Harmon. Some transfers were under $2,000. Others were higher, carefully spaced, always just below the business account's normal variance range. Cheryl Vogt had annotated several in red pen. Below auto alert threshold, pattern consistent with deliberate structuring. Deliberate, that word stayed with me. At the bottom of the envelope was Cheryl's typed summary page. At the top, in Clifford's handwriting, "Cheryl doesn't know about this box. She sent copies to Harold. I made my own copy. If you need her, Harold has her contact information." I asked Randall Fitch if there was something I could use to open the flash drive. He brought in a bank laptop without a word and left me alone again. 2 folders. The first held digital copies of everything in the envelope, plus additional records going back further than I'd expected. The second was labeled correspondence. I opened it. Emails. Between Gregory and Monica, routed through the business account's shared project management inbox. The one Clifford had access to, but hadn't monitored because Gregory managed it day to day. The first ones were from almost 2 years ago. Monica's emails had a particular clipped efficiency. "We're behind on the bridge loan. Can you pull from the LLC this month without it flagging?" Gregory's reply, "Let me see what the balance looks like. Keep it small." 6 months later, pulled another 3. "Dad hasn't mentioned anything." Monica, "Good, we need more. The interest alone is eating us alive." Then, near the end of the records, the one that made me set my hands flat on the table and breathe. Gregory to Monica. "He's been pulling statements more carefully lately. Saw him at the printer last week. We need to ease back." Monica, "We can't ease back. Finish what you started." I closed the laptop. Clifford had seen Gregory at the printer, had noticed his son noticing him notice, and Gregory had kept going. I requested paper copies of everything. Randall Fitch had them ready in a folder before I'd finished my glass of water. Before I left, he handed me one more item, a smaller envelope kept separate from the safe deposit box in the bank's secure records. "Your husband left this to be given to you only after the box was opened," he said. Inside was a letter from Harold Beach, on legal letterhead. The trust summary. Clear, numbered, detailed. The house, Clifford's pension remainder, 2 investment accounts Gregory had never known about. All protected. Any confirmed financial misconduct by Gregory Harmon would trigger automatic revocation of beneficiary status across all instruments. At the bottom, Harold Beach had written by hand, Cliff's specific instruction: make sure she understands the decision is hers alone, no one else's. I drove to a motel just off the highway and checked in. I sat on the edge of the bed and read everything again from the beginning, slowly, until I understood all of it. Then I called my son. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, Mom, everything okay?" "Fine," I said. "I want to have dinner Saturday. Just the three of us. Are you and Monica free?" A pause. But I heard it. "Sure," he said. "What time?" 7. "Okay." Another beat. "Is everything actually all right?" "I've been thinking," I said. "It's been a while since we all sat down together." He said that sounded nice. We hung up. I set the phone on the nightstand, turned out the lamp, and lay in the dark for a long time. Saturday came. I cooked a real dinner because I didn't want the evening to feel like an ambush, even though in some ways it was. By 7, the table was set, the food was warm, and I was sitting in the kitchen when headlights swept across the driveway. Gregory came in first, holding a bottle of wine, easy smile in place. Monica followed, wearing a scarf I'd never seen. They moved the way people move when they've spent the drive coaching each other to act normally. Dinner was quiet for the first 20 minutes. Gregory talked about a job bid. Monica mentioned a listing that had gone pending. I asked the right questions and listened to their answers without giving anything away, because I'd spent 31 years with a man who taught me that patience is not the same as surrender. When the plates were nearly empty, I stood up. I brought the folder from the sideboard and set it on the table. Neither of them moved at first. Monica's fork stayed in her hand. Gregory looked at the folder, then at me. "What is that?" he asked. "Something your father left me," I said, "in Fort Wayne." The color in Gregory's face shifted, not dramatically. Just a small change, like a shadow passing across still water. Monica set her fork down without a sound. I opened the folder and placed the first document between them, the transaction summary, the one with the totals in red. Gregory looked at it. I watched his eyes move across the numbers, and I could tell from the way his jaw tightened that he recognized every single one. "There's a full accounting," I said, 16 months of records, and the correspondence. Monica made a small sound, not a word, just air. Gregory leaned back in his chair. He was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at me and said, "This isn't what it looks like." I didn't answer that. "We were always going to pay it back," he said, and his voice had changed. Not defensive exactly, but reaching for something. "We had a plan." Monica turned to look at him. Something passed between them that I read clearly enough. "Stop talking." "Gregory," I said, "when did it start?" He looked at the table. "About 2 years ago." "Before or after you were added to the account?" He said nothing. Monica said, "We had a bridge loan situation. It was going to cost us the house. We needed time to restructure." Her voice was steady, almost businesslike. "It was meant to be temporary." "Temporary," I said. "We were going to replace everything," she said again, and I heard the faint edge under it now. The impatience of someone who thought she was explaining something simple to someone who was being slow. This wasn't intended to be permanent. I looked at her for a moment, then I looked at my son. "Your father found out," I said. "He saw you at the printer pulling statements. He noticed what you were doing, and he didn't confront you. He spent the months he had left, making sure I would be taken care of first." My voice stayed level because raising it wasn't what this moment required. Then his heart stopped, and he never got to finish telling me himself. Gregory closed his eyes. When he opened them, his face had broken in the particular way I'd only seen once before. The day we stood at Clifford's graveside, and Gregory put his hand on the casket. That same specific breaking. He pressed the back of his hand to his mouth for a moment. "Mom," he said, his voice was small, "I'm sorry, I know what that's worth right now, but I am." Monica didn't say anything. She was looking at the folder. I reached into my bag and placed Harold Beach's letter beside the transaction summary. "This is the trust your father set up," I said. "Read the 3rd section." Gregory reached for it. Monica leaned in to read at the same time. I watched their faces as they got to the 3rd section. Monica pulled back first. Gregory set the letter down very carefully. "The decision isn't automatic," I said. "It's mine. What you do next, not what you say, not what you promise, that determines what happens." Monica stood up abruptly and walked to the kitchen window. She stood there with her back to us for a moment. When she turned around, what was on her face wasn't guilt. It was calculation. She was already working the angles. "We can restructure the loan," she said to Gregory. "Not to me. Harold Beach is just an attorney. He doesn't get to." "Monica," I said. She looked at me. "This conversation is between me and my son," I said. "You're welcome to sit down and listen. But the decisions here are not yours to make." She stared at me, then she sat down. Gregory looked at her, and then back at me, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Something that looked, underneath everything else, like relief. As if having someone draw that line clearly had done something he didn't know how to do for himself. "I'll call Harold," Gregory said. "Whatever he needs, whatever it takes." The evening ended without raised voices, without doors slamming. Gregory and Monica left just after 9. I stood at the kitchen window and watched their taillights disappear at the end of the block. Then I washed the dishes by hand, the way I always do when I need to think, and I let myself feel everything I'd been holding at a distance since Fort Wayne. The grief underneath the betrayal. The way the betrayal made me miss Clifford more, not less, because he'd been carrying all of this alone, and I hadn't known, and now I couldn't tell him that I understood why. He'd known, and he'd still made sure the choice was mine. The next several months were slow. Gregory met with Harold Beach in early March. The repayment structure took 3 separate sessions to finalize, but it was finished, written, witnessed, signed. A clear schedule with a first payment that arrived on exactly the date specified. Monica didn't attend those meetings. By May, Gregory mentioned she'd moved into a short-term rental. He didn't say much beyond that, and I didn't press him. Some things settle themselves in their own time. Gregory came by one afternoon in June, alone, for the first time in longer than I could remember. He sat at the kitchen table and drank his coffee without filling every silence with noise, the way his father used to do. It was the first time in a long while that he'd reminded me of Clifford. "I keep thinking about the watch," he said after a while. "Why he put the note there." "Because he knew you'd ask for it eventually," I said. Gregory nodded slowly. He knew. He usually did. Gregory was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know how to fix what I did to you." "You start where you are," I said. "That's all there is." He left around noon. At the door he turned and looked at me the way he used to when he was young, before everything had gotten complicated, and for just a second, I could see both of them in the same face. The boy he'd been, and the man he still had a chance to become. I closed the door and walked back through the quiet house. The pocket watch was on the sideboard, where I'd kept it since I brought it home from Fort Wayne. I picked it up, feeling the familiar weight of it, the cool surface of the crystal, the small scratch that had been there since our honeymoon. I pressed my thumbnail under the outer case back, the way I now knew to do. The inner dome was empty, of course. The note was in Harold Beach's files, with everything else. But I looked at the small, smooth space anyway, at the place where Clifford had thought to look, all those months before he died, and had chosen to leave a message for the one person he knew would still be looking for it. I closed the case gently and held the watch in both hands for a moment. Then I set it back on the sideboard, in the center this time, where the light could reach it. Clifford hadn't just left me away to find the truth. He'd left me the one thing I hadn't known I'd lost. My own certainty, my own footing, the steady knowledge that what I sensed in a room was real, and that I had every right to trust it. And in the end, I understood. That was the most carefully kept thing he'd ever given me.